You sleep for 8 hours, yet you wake up exhausted. You take the weekend off. But by Monday morning, your mind is entirely depleted. You are stuck because you do not understand the difference between numbing yourself and actually recovering. Your version of rest is keeping your brain in a state of high alert, and it is slowly destroying your capacity to perform. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that doesn't make sense. You sleep for 8 hours. You're not physically overworked. You didn't run a marathon. You didn't pull an all-nighter. And yet you wake up already behind. Not just tired, but mentally heavy. Like your brain never fully shut down. By mid-morning, you've already checked your phone dozens of times. Emails, messages, headlines, notifications. Nothing urgent, but everything pulling at your attention. You try to focus, but something feels fragmented. You start one task, then drift. You open a tab, then another. You respond to something small, then forget what you were originally doing. And by the end of the day, you feel drained. Not from deep work, not from meaningful output, but from constant switching. Constant low-level stimulation, constant noise. So you tell yourself you need to rest. And that's where the second layer of the problem begins. You sit down in the evening, maybe on the couch. You tell yourself, I just need to relax for a bit. You open your phone, or Netflix, or YouTube. Something easy, something passive. And for a moment, it feels like relief. But notice what actually happens next. You don't fully relax. You don't fully disengage. Your body is still, but your mind is moving fast, processing images, tracking narratives, reacting emotionally, making micro decisions every few seconds. Skip, scroll, click, watch, react. An hour passes, then two. At some point, you look up and feel worse. Not restored, not clear, just dull, slightly agitated, mentally cluttered. Let me give you a simple scene. You pick up your phone at 9:30 p.m. just to check one thing. A message, a notification, something small. You unlock it. A headline catches your eye, then a short video, then another, then something slightly more interesting, then something emotional, then something irrelevant but stimulating enough to keep going. You don't even remember deciding to continue. Suddenly it's 10:45. You put the phone down, and instead of feeling rested, your mind is buzzing, slightly anxious, overloaded with fragments of other people's lives, opinions, and problems. Now you go to sleep like that. Think about that. Or another version. It's the weekend. You've been waiting for it all week. You finally have time to recover. But what does that recovery look like? You wake up and immediately reach for your phone. Not because you need to, but because it's automatic. Then maybe a few hours disappear into content. Later, maybe more passive entertainment. A show, a series, something easy. No pressure, no demands. It feels like rest until Sunday night arrives. And something feels off. Your body isn't physically exhausted, but your mind feels depleted, unfocused, slightly irritable. not ready to re-engage with real life. So you go into Monday already behind. This is a pattern. And most people never question it. They assume the problem is stress, or workload, or age, or sleep quality. But there's a deeper issue hiding underneath all of this. Your brain never gets silence. Not real silence. Not the kind that allows it to reset. You are constantly consuming. Even when you think you're resting. And over time, this creates a very specific kind of fatigue, not physical exhaustion, but cognitive saturation. Your attention becomes thinner. Your thoughts become noisier. Your ability to focus weakens. And the most dangerous part? It feels normal. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you sat in complete silence without reaching for stimulation? No phone. No background noise. No input. Just you and your thoughts. For most people, that question is uncomfortable. Because somewhere along the way, we lost the ability to simply be still. We replaced rest with distraction. We replaced recovery with consumption. And now we're paying the price for it every single day. You don't need more time off. You don't need better entertainment. You don't even need more sleep. You need a different relationship with rest itself. Because right now, the way you are resting is the exact thing keeping you exhausted. What makes this problem difficult is that it hides behind something that feels harmless. You believe you are resting, but neurologically, you are doing the opposite. And this is where most people never look closely enough. Because on the surface, the logic seems reasonable. You are not working. You are not under pressure. You are not exerting effort. So it must be rest. But your brain does not measure rest by your posture. It measures rest by the level of stimulation it is processing. And right now, your version of rest is saturated with stimulation. Let's make this simple. Your nervous system operates in two primary modes. The first is the sympathetic nervous system. This is your alert mode. It is responsible for focus, reaction, decision-making, and survival. It activates when you're working, solving problems, responding to demands. The second is the parasympathetic nervous system. This is your recovery mode. It is responsible for repair, restoration, memory consolidation, and emotional regulation. Real rest only happens when the parasympathetic system is allowed to take over. But here's the problem. Scrolling, streaming, and constant digital input keep you locked in a low-grade sympathetic state. Not full stress, not panic, but a continuous state of mild activation. And that state is enough to block recovery. Think about what your brain is doing when you scroll. Every few seconds, it is evaluating something new. Is this interesting? Should I keep watching? Do I like this? Do I agree with this? Should I respond? These are micro decisions. Small, fast, and constant. Individually, they seem insignificant, but over time, they accumulate into cognitive load. Your brain never gets to idle. It never downshifts. It just keeps processing. And this is where dopamine enters the picture. Dopamine is not just pleasure. It is anticipation. It is motivation. It is the signal that something might be worth paying attention to. Every swipe, every notification, every new piece of content delivers a small dopamine spike. Not enough to satisfy. Just enough to keep you engaged. This creates a loop. You feel slightly tired. So you reach for stimulation. The stimulation gives you a small lift, but it also increases your baseline of arousal. So when you stop, you feel even more depleted. So you reach again. This is not recovery. This is neurological churn. Let me ask you something. If your brain is constantly chasing the next input, when does it actually reset? Most people never think about that. They assume sleep will fix it. But even sleep quality is affected by what you do before you close your eyes. If your brain goes into sleep in a state of overstimulation, it does not transition cleanly into deep recovery phases. It carries residue. Fragments of information, emotional spikes, unresolved inputs, and that disrupts the architecture of your sleep. So you wake up technically rested but not restored. There's another layer to this. It's called attention residue. Every time you switch tasks, a small part of your attention stays attached to the previous stimulus. Now imagine what happens when you consume hundreds of fragments in a single evening. Short videos, news clips, messages, emails, comments. Your attention becomes scattered across dozens of unfinished loops. And when you try to rest, your mind doesn't go quiet. It replays. It jumps. It searches. Because it was never given closure. This is why silence feels uncomfortable. Not because something is wrong, but because your brain has been trained to expect constant input. And when that input disappears, it doesn't know what to do, so it creates its own noise. This is also where dopamine desensitization begins. The more stimulation you consume, the less sensitive your brain becomes to it. What used to feel engaging now feels flat. So you need more. Faster content, more intense input, more novelty. And slowly, your baseline shifts. Simple things stop feeling satisfying. Reading becomes harder. Thinking deeply becomes harder. Being still becomes almost unbearable. Think about that. You are not just tired. Your brain is being conditioned away from recovery. And this is where it becomes dangerous. Because the very behavior you rely on to relax is the same behavior that is degrading your ability to feel restored. Let me ask you directly. When you sit down to rest, are you reducing stimulation or just changing the type of stimulation? Are you actually allowing your mind to recover? Or are you keeping it occupied so you don't have to feel the fatigue underneath? Most people never cross that line of awareness. They stay at the surface. They keep adjusting their schedule, their workload, their sleep duration. But they never address the core contradiction. You cannot recover in the same environment that is draining you. And right now, your environment is not just external. It is digital. It is constant. And it is always within reach. Until you see that clearly, you will keep chasing rest and never actually experience it. There's a quiet detail that separates elite performers from everyone else. It's not just how they train. It's how seriously they protect recovery. And if you look closely, you start to notice something that feels almost extreme. Not intense effort, but disciplined absence. Let's take someone like LeBron James. At the surface, most people focus on his physical ability, his longevity, his consistency over decades. But what rarely gets discussed with enough weight is how deliberate he is about recovery. He is known to prioritize sleep at a level most adults would consider unrealistic. 8 to 10 hours a night. Not occasionally. Not when convenient. But as a non-negotiable system. And not just sleep quantity, sleep quality, controlled environment, reduced light exposure, temperature regulation, minimal disruption, intentional wind down. This is not accidental. This is engineered. Because at that level of performance, recovery is not something you hope happens. It is something you build. And that mindset changes everything. Most people approach recovery like a leftover. Whatever time is left at the end of the day, that's where rest goes. Elite performers reverse that. They build their lives around the assumption that without recovery, nothing else works. And here's the part most people miss. It's not just about sleep. It's about what happens before sleep. Because the brain does not switch from chaos to recovery instantly. It transitions, and that transition must be protected. Athletes at that level understand something very simple. You cannot flood the brain with stimulation and then expect it to shut down cleanly. So they eliminate noise. They reduce input. They create what is essentially a buffer zone between performance and recovery. No constant scrolling. No late-night digital overload. No uncontrolled stimulation right before bed. Instead, there is structure, ritual, repetition, and most importantly, constraint. Think about that word. Constraint. It's not glamorous. It's not exciting. But it is the foundation control. While most people are adding more content, more stimulation, more noise, elite performers are removing. They are protecting their nervous system the same way they would protect a physical injury. Because to them, cognitive clarity is not optional. It is the asset. And here's where the contrast becomes uncomfortable. The average person today is trying to operate at a high-level career, responsibilities, decisions, relationships, but their recovery system looks nothing like someone who takes performance seriously. They work like professionals, but they recover like amateurs. Late-night screens, constant input, irregular sleep. No boundaries between stimulation and rest. And then they wonder why their energy feels unstable, why their focus collapses, why their mood fluctuates. Let me ask you something. If your mind is your primary tool, why are you treating its recovery like an afterthought? Because that's what this really comes down to. Priority, not knowledge, not access. Priority. LeBron James is not recovering better because he has access to something magical. He is recovering better because he respects the cost of not doing it. He understands that every decision he makes, especially the small ones at the end of the day, either supports or sabotages his performance. And over time, those decisions compound. Now, bring this back to your own life. You may not be a professional athlete, but you are still performing every day. Cognitively, emotionally, strategically, your decisions matter. Your clarity matters. Your energy matters. And yet, the way you end your day often works directly against all of that. You overstimulate your brain right before asking it to recover. You flood it with input right before asking it to consolidate. You keep it in a state of alertness right before asking it to shut down. And then you expect elite output the next day. That contradiction is costing you more than you realize. Because recovery is not just about feeling better. It is about maintaining the quality of your thinking, your patience, your ability to stay focused when things get difficult, your ability to make decisions without fatigue distorting them. This is not abstract. This is measurable in how you show up. So here's the real question. Are you structuring your recovery like someone who takes performance seriously, or like someone who assumes it will take care of itself? Because those two approaches lead to completely different lives. And most people never make that distinction. They stay stuck in the middle, working hard, resting poorly, and slowly losing the sharpness they once had. Elite performers don't let that happen. Not because they are more motivated, but because they are more disciplined about what they remove. And that discipline is what gives them an edge that most people never even realize exists. There is a pattern operating beneath your awareness. You don't see it. You don't consciously follow it. But it is shaping your energy, your focus, and your fatigue every single day. And once you understand it, a lot of your exhaustion will finally make sense. Your brain does not function in a straight line. It operates in cycles, roughly 90-minute cycles, known as ultradian rhythms. Within each cycle, your brain moves through a predictable arc, a rise in focus, a peak in cognitive performance, and then a gradual decline. This is not a flaw. This is design. Your brain is not built for constant output. It is built for oscillation. Effort then recovery. Focus then release. But here is where modern life disrupts that system. We ignore the second half of the cycle. We push through fatigue. Or worse, we rest in a way that never actually resets the system. Let's slow this down. At the beginning of a 90-minute cycle, your brain is sharp, clear, capable of deep focus. This is when meaningful work happens. But as you move toward the end of that cycle, something changes. Your attention starts to drift. Your thinking becomes slightly slower. You feel resistance where there was once flow. This is a signal. Not failure. Not laziness. A signal. Your brain is asking for recovery. And here's a critical detail most people miss. That recovery requires low input, not different input. Low input. Silence. Stillness. A temporary absence of stimulation. Because during that window, your brain is doing something essential. It is consolidating information, clearing metabolic waste, resetting neural pathways. This is where clarity is rebuilt. But instead of honoring that signal, most people override it. They reach for their phone. They open a new tab. They switch tasks. They inject more stimulation into a system that is already fatigued. And in that moment, something subtle but important happens. The brain does not reset. It extends the fatigue. Let me show you the loop. You feel tired after a period of work. That is the trigger. You crave relief. That is the craving. You reach for your phone or some form of stimulation. That is the response. You get a small hit of distraction. That is the reward. But the reward is incomplete because it doesn't solve the underlying fatigue. It only masks it. So when the stimulation ends, the fatigue is still there, often worse than before. And now your brain has learned something. When I feel tired, I should seek stimulation, not recovery. Stimulation. That loop repeats again and again until it becomes automatic. This is the invisible system controlling your energy. And this is why you can spend an entire day feeling busy, yet never feel truly restored. Because you never complete the cycle. You only interrupt it. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you felt tired and chose to sit in silence for 15 minutes instead of reaching for your phone. No input, no distraction, just stillness. For many people, that feels almost unnatural, even uncomfortable, because the brain has been conditioned to expect stimulation as a default response to fatigue. But that conditioning comes at a cost. Every time you choose stimulation over recovery, you are training your nervous system to stay in a semi-activated state, not fully alert, not fully relaxed, just stuck in between. And over time, that state becomes your baseline. This is why your energy feels flat, why your focus doesn't fully return, why your mind feels cluttered even after rest. Because you are never giving it the conditions it needs to reset. Now think about your day as a series of these cycles. Morning, midday, afternoon, each one offering a window for both performance and recovery. If you ignore the recovery phase repeatedly, the cost accumulates. By the end of the day, your brain is not just tired. It is saturated. And then you make one more mistake. You try to recover from that saturation with more stimulation. Scrolling, streaming, consuming, which pushes your system even further away from real recovery. And the cycle continues into the next day. This is not just about feeling tired. This is about a system that is quietly degrading your cognitive capacity over time. Your ability to focus deeply. Your ability to think clearly. Your ability to regulate emotion under pressure. All of it depends on whether the cycle is respected or ignored. Most people ignore it, not intentionally, but habitually, because no one taught them that recovery is not passive. It is specific. It requires a removal of input. And this is where the shit begins. The moment you stop seeing fatigue as something to escape and start seeing it as a signal to step back, to disconnect, to allow your brain to complete the cycle it was designed to follow. Let me leave you with this. If your brain never get a clean recovery window, how many of your low-energy days are actually just incomplete cycles stacking on top of each other? Think about that. Because once you see the system clearly, you can't unsee it. And more importantly, you can start to take control of it. Before we go any further, pause for a moment. Not the video. You're thinking. Because right now, there are two types of people still listening. The first type is nodding along, recognizing the patterns, seeing the truth in it, but staying passive. Treating this like information, not intervention. The second type feels slightly uncomfortable because something is starting to click, not just intellectually, but personally. Let me ask you directly. Which one are you? Because understanding this changes nothing unless you are willing to act on it. You already know what your evenings look like. You already know how you rest. You already know how you feel the next morning. There is no confusion, only a decision to keep repeating the cycle or to interrupt it. And this is where most people hesitate. Not because it's complicated, but because it requires discipline in a place they've never applied before. Their downtime. So before we move into the system that will actually fix this, decide something. Are you here to be entertained? Or are you here to regain control? Because the next part only works if you choose the second. Now we move from awareness to control. Because insight without structure doesn't change behavior. It just creates temporary clarity that fades the moment friction appears. What you need is a system, not a vague intention to use your phone less, Not a hopeful idea that tonight will be different. A system that removes negotiation. A system that works even when you are tired, distracted, or resistant. This is what I call your digital landing gear. Just like an aircraft cannot drop from cruising altitude directly onto the runway, your brain cannot go from high stimulation into deep recovery without a controlled descent. Right now, most people try to crash land into sleep. They go from full input to lights off, and the brain doesn't follow. It keeps spinning. This framework fixes that. Step 1 is simple, but it will challenge you immediately. You install a hard stop, a non-negotiable, 60-minute screen cutoff before sleep. Not a suggestion, not when possible. A boundary. Let me be precise. 60 minutes before you plan to sleep, all screens go off. Phone, laptop, television, everything. Why? Because your brain needs time to downshift. Dopamine levels need to stabilize. Neural activity needs to slow. Your nervous system needs a transition from sympathetic to parasympathetic mode. That transition does not happen instantly, and every minute of stimulation you add delays it. Now here's where most people fail. They treat this like a soft rule. They say, I'll just check one thing. And that one thing becomes 20 minutes. Because the system you are trying to interrupt is designed to pull you back in. So remove the decision entirely. Set an alarm. When it goes off, you disconnect. No debate. If you need to, physically move your phone out of reach, into another room, a drawer, somewhere that introduces friction, because willpower is unreliable but environment is predictable. Now, the second step, you do not remove stimulation without replacing it. If you simply eliminate screens and do nothing else, your brain will crave input, and it will push you back toward the easiest source. So you replace digital input with low dopamine, analog activity. This is critical. Not high engagement, not high novelty. Low stimulation. Reading something simple. Writing, journaling, sitting with a notebook, even slow, quiet movement. The goal is not entertainment. The goal is decompression. You are guiding your brain downward, not keeping it occupied. Let me ask you something. When you remove noise, what fills that space? For most people, discomfort, restlessness, the urge to reach for something. That is not a problem. That is a withdrawal from constant stimulation. And if you can sit through that phase, something shifts. Your thoughts slow down. Your breathing changes. Your mind starts organizing itself. This is the beginning of real recovery. Now, step 3. You create a sensory downshift. Your environment must support what your nervous system is trying to do. Lower the lights. Reduce harsh brightness. Limit sound. No new information. No new inputs. You are signaling safety to your brain. You are telling it, nothing else is required right now. This matters more than people realize, because your brain is constantly scanning for signals. Light, noise, movement, and if those signals suggest activity, your system stays alert. So you remove them. You create stillness intentionally. Now we extend this beyond the evening, because recovery is not just something that happens at night. It happens throughout the day, or it doesn't happen at all. This is where most high-functioning adults break down. They work in long, uninterrupted stretches, ignore fatigue signals, and then try to compensate later. But the brain doesn't work that way. So step 4 is installing micro-recovery blocks. Every 90 minutes of focused work, you step away. Not to your phone, not to email, not to stimulation, to nothing, 10 to 20 minutes. No input. Walk slowly. Sit quietly. Look out a window. Let your brain idle. This is where ultradian cycles complete. This is where clarity resets. And this is where most people sabotage themselves. They say they're taking a break, but they fill it with content, which means they never actually exit the cycle. So be honest. If your break includes a screen, it is not a break. It is a continuation. Now step 5. You shift your identity. Because behavior that is not tied to identity does not last. Right now, most people see recovery as optional. Something you do if you have time. Something you earn after working hard. That mindset is a problem. Recovery is not a reward. It is a requirement. You begin to see yourself as someone who protects your energy, who respects your cognitive capacity, who understands that your mind is not an unlimited resource. And once that identity is in place, your decisions change. Not because you are forcing them, but because they align with who you are. Let me ask you something. Do you take pride in how you rest? Or do you treat it like an afterthought? Because that answer is shaping your performance more than your effort ever will. Now the final step. You start tracking energy, not time. Most people measure their day by hours. How long they worked. How long they rested. But that misses the point. What matters is the quality of your energy within those hours. When are you sharp? When do you dip? When do you feel clear versus scattered? And how do your habits influence those states? You begin observing patterns, not judging them, just noticing. Because awareness is what allows adjustment. And adjustment is what creates control. This entire framework is not complicated, but it is precise, and it requires something most people avoid. Consistency, not perfection. Consistency. You will feel resistance, especially in the beginning. Your brain will look for shortcuts, excuses, exceptions. That's expected. Because you are breaking a loop that has been reinforced for years. But if you stay with it even for a few days, you will start to feel something unfamiliar. Quiet, clarity, a different kind of energy. Not wired, not overstimulated, just stable. And that is the foundation of everything you are trying to build. Not more effort, not more discipline in your work, but discipline in your recovery. Because once your system learns how to truly reset, everything else becomes easier to sustain. Now slow down. Because this is the part most people try to skip. Not because it isn't important, but because it's uncomfortable. Up to this point, we've talked about systems, patterns, behavior loops, practical structure. But none of that matters if you don't confront the deeper question underneath it. Why are you avoiding real rest in the first place? Not the surface answer. The real one. Because when you remove stimulation, something else appears. Silence. And inside that silence, there is usually something waiting. Unfinished thoughts, low-level anxiety, decisions you've been postponing, a sense that something in your life isn't aligned. So instead of sitting with that, you reach for noise, not consciously, but habitually. Let me ask you something. When your day ends and everything gets quiet, what you try not to feel? Think about that carefully. Because most people don't have a rest problem. They have an avoidance pattern. They are not using stimulation because they need it. They are using it because it's easier than facing what's underneath. And over time, that avoidance becomes normalized. You don't even recognize it anymore. You just call it relaxing. But if your version of relaxation leaves you more drained, more scattered, and less clear, is it really rest? Or is escape? Another question. If I removed your phone, you're streaming your constant inputs for just one evening, what would happen? Would you feel calm? Or would you feel restless, uncomfortable, slightly uneasy? That reaction tells you everything. Because a regulated nervous system does not panic in silence. It settles into it. So if silence feels difficult, it's not because silence is a problem. It's because your system has been conditioned to depend on noise. Now go one level deeper. How much of your life is being lived in reaction rather than intention? You wake up and immediately consume. You work and constantly switch. You rest and continue consuming. At no point does your mind fully disengage or fully direct itself. It just moves from one input to the next, and slowly that erodes something fundamental. Your ability to choose your focus. Your ability to think without interruption. Your ability to sit with a problem long enough to actually solve it. This is not just about fatigue. This is about autonomy. Let me ask you directly. Are you in control of your attention? Or are you constantly responding to whatever appears in front of you? Because those are two very different lives. One is directed. The other is reactive. And the gap between them widens over time. Another question. What would your mental state feel like if you actually gave your brain what it needs to recover? Not distraction, not numbing, but true recovery. Would you think more clearly? Would you feel more stable? Would your decisions improve? Most people never find out. Not because it's unavailable, but because they never remove the interference long enough to experience it. And this is the quiet cost of fake rest. It doesn't just keep you tired. It keeps you from discovering what you're actually capable of when your mind is clear. So here's the final question I want you to sit with. Not answer quickly. Sit with, are you using your free time to rebuild your mind or to escape from it? Because that answer is not abstract. It shows up in how you feel every morning. It shows up in how you think under pressure. It shows up in the quality of your life. And until you face that, honestly, no system will fully work. But once you do, everything begins to change. There is something you need to see clearly before we close this. Because if you don't, you will understand everything we've talked about and still drift back into the same pattern. You are not operating in a neutral environment. Your attention is being competed for constantly. Every platform you use, every feed you scroll, every piece of content you consume is engineered to keep you engaged, not restored. Engaged, which means the more exhausted you feel, the more vulnerable you become to the very systems that are draining you. Think about that. When your energy is low, your discipline drops. When your Discipline drops you reach for ease. And ease is always one tap away. So the cycle reinforces itself, not by accident, by design. And over time, something starts to happen quietly. Your baseline shifts. You stop expecting clarity. You normalize distraction. You accept fatigue as part of your identity. And this is where it becomes dangerous. Because once exhaustion feels normal, you stop questioning it. You stop resisting it. You build your life around it. Lower standards. Shallower focus. Faster decisions with less depth behind them. Let me say this directly. If you do not actively protect your recovery, you will lose your ability to perform at a high level. Not all at once, but gradually, subtly, until one day, the version of you that was sharp, focused, and clear feels distant. Not because you lost your potential, but because you stopped protecting the conditions that sustain it. This is not about comfort. This is about decline. And the only thing that interrupts that decline is a decision, a deliberate refusal to keep operating on a system that is quietly wearing you down. At this point, the problem is no longer unclear. You know what's happening. You know why you feel the way you feel. And more importantly, you know what needs to change. So this is where comfort ends. Because from here forward, it's not about understanding. It's about standards. You do not fix this by hoping you'll feel more motivated tomorrow. You fix this by making a decision that removes negotiation from your behavior. Starting tonight. Not next week. Not when things calm down. Tonight, you draw a line. 60 minutes before sleep. No screens. Not reduced. Not just a little. None. You will feel resistance. Your mind will look for reasons to delay. One last check. One quick video. It doesn't matter tonight. That voice is not logic. It is conditioning. And if you follow it, you stay exactly where you are. So you don't argue with it. You override it. You create the condition your brain actually needs, not the one it has been trained to crave. And then you sit in it. The silence, the discomfort, the absence of input. This is where most people quit. Because it feels unfamiliar. Because it feels empty. But stay there. Because what feels like emptiness is actually space. Space for your nervous system to downshift. Space for your thoughts to settle. Space for your brain to finally begin repairing what constant stimulation has been interrupting. You are not losing anything in that moment. You are reclaiming something. Clarity, control, stability. And once you experience that, even once, you will start to understand something most people never fully grasp. Rest is not passive. It is a skill. And like any skill, it requires discipline. The discipline to stop when your brain asks for more. The discipline to disconnect when everything around you is designed to keep you engaged. The discipline to choose long-term clarity over short-term relief. Let me ask you one final question. What would your life look like if your mind was consistently clear? Not occasionally. Not on your best days. But as your baseline. How would you think? How would you make decisions? How would you show up in your work, your relationships, your responsibilities? Because that version of you is not hypothetical. It is the result of a system. And that system begins with how you recover. So don't treat this like advice. Treat it like a line in the ground. Either you continue feeding a pattern that drains you, or you start building one that restores you. There is no middle. There is no balance between chaos and control. There is only direction. And every night, you choose which direction you reinforce. So choose deliberately. Protect your recovery. Respect your mind. And prove, through action, not intention, that you are no longer willing to operate below your capacity. If you are ready to stop burning out and commit to elite recovery, subscribe and start respecting your mind.